Welcome back to this special edition of the Stossel Show. We're in Las Vegas for Freedom Fest. Now, most people here are libertarians. We want to shrink government. We don't like taxes. But, hey, we need national defense and local police, some pollution control rules, too. There are some things most of us say government must do. How are they going to get the money? Taxes. Got to have some, right? Yes? It's a tough crowd here. And I see why, and our taxes always tend to go up. And that was part of Rome's problem, say, two people who try to spread the word about the damage taxes do. Grover Norquist is head of Americans for Tax Reform. He's somehow persuaded many politicians to pledge to never raise taxes. Economist Steve Moore covers these issues for the Wall Street Journal. So, Grover, Rome had high tax rates?
Well, not always. At first, for about 400 years, they had no real direct internal taxes because they looted their neighbors. That may not...
We're not advocating that, right?
We got to talk to the Canadians, but that may not work out. But then, even that wasn't enough. And so they started having dramatically higher taxes. The amount of money they spent on the armies to occupy those other guys cost more, perhaps, than they were able to extract. Taxes got...
They started with tariffs.
They had tariffs. Caesar Augustus brought us the first death tax. Constantine brought us the first income tax. All the stuff that we're now living with, they were thinking up. The property taxes, so rough that people were actually abandoning their property and just say, leave me alone. And then they had to pass laws to not let you leave your property. So you had to stay there and farm it so they could loot you. Things got, towards the end, it got very, very rough, and it's part of why things didn't work.
One penalty for not paying your taxes was being sold into slavery.
Or killed, yeah.
That's the modern day IRS, right? I mean, that's what they do to us now.
When they would demand payment in gold and silver, the only way to get it was to sell, in some cases, children into slavery, oneself into slavery, to get currency. It was that bad. Yeah.
But 1%, I read, was the highest income tax. Steve,
well, what happened, I mean, Grover's exactly right. And what happened in Rome, and one of the reasons Rome fell, was they kept collecting more and more money from the tributaries, the outlying areas, and it all went into Rome. And you had a massive revolt among the people all over the country who weren't in Rome. And by the way, that's happening in America today, I think. People are sick and tired of seeing their tax dollars sent to Washington and none of it coming back to the states from whence it came. And that's one of the reasons I think we should lower federal taxes and let states do this. That's one of the great things about America. We're a federalist system. The states created the federal government. The federal government did not create the states.
The reaction
right?
to the tax farmers that they had, they would go out and collect the taxes.
They called them tax farmers?
Tax farmers, tax collectors. It was so bad that in one revolt in Asia Minor, they killed about 80,000 of them in a day or two.
We don't advocate killing tax collectors on this show.
It was a 4-year war that Sulla waged to put down that revolt. But it was clearly a serious tax revolt.
And John, to your point, when you asked me about the 1% tax, I don't know what those tax rates were in Rome, but when we created our federal income tax in the United States back in, I think it was around 1913, 1915, the top income tax rate when the income tax started was just 7%. Within 10 years, the top income tax rate went from 7% to 70%. You know, and it's remained high ever since. That's why I've always believed Steve Forbes had it right. We ought to go back to an 18% flat tax, get rid of all the deductions, all the loopholes, make it as simple as possible, collect the money you need, but don't create all these special interest groups. And by the way, the people who are most opposed to the flat tax, the people who are most opposed to the flat tax are people in Washington, D.C., because you take the power away from Washington.
Look, when we went into revolt 1774, 1775, Americans in the colonies were paying 2%. Our oppressors, the Brits in London, were paying 20%. It's expensive running an empire. We need to go back towards 2%. I like 2% better than 18. That's what...
2% would be good. And to be clear, we're at 40% about if you include state and local.
Yeah. but you don't have to get we want to get towards 2%. We functioned fairly well beyond that. And the reason the British were taxing themselves at 20% was that they were running an empire.
Thank you, Grover and Steve. Coming up, when governments can't raise taxes anymore, they find other ways to fleece people, like devaluing the currency. Rome did that. Hey, America's doing it now. But what does that do to a country? Didn't work out so well for Rome. That's next.